All right, welcome in, everybody. It is Wednesday. Rob Vino, what a night last night. You just can't ask for a better start to the NCAA tournament. Two games that come down to the final possession. I wish UMBC ended a little bit differently, but I got one back in the NIT. So 1-1 for me last night. It was a great night of basketball to kick off the NCAA tournament. Hopefully we get that kind of excitement tonight. How was your Tuesday night?
Well, the UMBC game was especially good because I had over 139.5, and it was not really in question ever in that game that it wasn't going to get over the number. Where I failed last night was with the Yale-Wilmington game over. And again, it somewhat kicked myself. In fact, you and I discussed this one with each other. I kind of kicked myself for not playing underdog side, plus points rather than playing total. But I did what I did. Didn't get there. And also the late game, UNLV and Cal Irvine, I had over the total, and it landed on 147. Crazy game there, too. I know we're going to get into a little synopsis of last night's NIT, so I won't describe it yet. But, yeah, we were a little short after a very strong night with the opener, UMBC. In the NCAA tournament, the NIT didn't treat me as kind last night.
Yeah, that's so just 1-1 for me yesterday. I got my winner in the NIT. I actually kind of wish I leaned a little bit more into my NIT opinions. May have had another winner in there, but I want to start with just a couple takeaways from the NIT, but also I will timestamp this because I know people are going to want to come back to it. So I went through, this is just on teams that won yesterday. So when I was talking about, hey, you really got to know who's playing, right? And that's part of what we're going to do today when we go into the second wave of NIT games. I'm not even going to talk about the losing teams. There's no point in wasting time talking about teams their season is over. Rob, this is just on the winning teams last night. Auburn, no Keyshawn Murphy. He just didn't show up. The coaching staff was unaware he was not showing up. And so he did not play. And I would be kind of surprised if he plays at all in this tournament. That's typically not a great way to, that's not encouraging. They said they were not aware that he was not playing. So that's one starter down for Auburn. Now, Wichita State won their game. They had everyone there, but Will Berg got hurt. So that's one to keep an eye on for next round. Wichita State might be without their big Will Berg in the next round. Tulsa failed to cover against Stephen F. Austin. No David Green. That's a big deal for Tulsa. Leading scorer for Tulsa this year. He did not play. I'd wonder if he is out for this entire tournament. Oklahoma State had, and I think you were maybe onto this a little bit because you asked me about Davidson. No Anthony Roy, no Victorious Miller. I believe they might have been disciplinary. So on the broadcast, they said they broke a team rule. So maybe you'll see those guys back. Obviously, Parsafala, his season has been over. So Oklahoma State didn't cover. I'm kicking myself for it moved, and then I should have just took Davidson anyway because, they would have covered Davidson covered all numbers. But that's one where Oklahoma State goes through. They were basically without their top 3 or 4 scorers. And so that'll be an interesting one to watch in the next round. And then the final one, Rob, Liberty, one of their leading scorers, Metheny, was out. The winners, Seattle, UNLV, UNC Wilmington, all full strength. So those are the 8 teams that advanced. 5 of them had key guys out, and 3 of them were full strength. So now that I've laid that out there, any other takeaways from NIT action that you want to kind of put in this segment right here?
Yeah, I can tell you that I do have a contact inside Oklahoma State. That's how quiet that was kept. Quiet enough for me to be asking at, I think, 1:30 Eastern time yesterday, still asking, any idea why this line is going down, to my buddy who is getting direct information from, I won't mention the name, but one-time very prominent coach here with a bunch of kids. And he did not relay anything, not any suspensions, not anything. So I'm sitting there wondering, because I was on the Oklahoma State side, and I'm wondering, what am I thinking here? What is wrong? Still couldn't get to the info. Turned it on last night, as you mentioned. Of course, we knew Fala has been out for 4 games, right? He's not coming back this year. He's done. But when you're sitting without Anthony Roy, Victorious Miller, Isaiah Coleman, and Vukovic, and you turn it on, and did they still win? It's
Yeah.
not a ringing indictment for Davidson, who had 50 first half points and couldn't. And Oklahoma State, there was a point with about 2 minutes, no, less than 2 minutes, maybe a minute and a half left, where they were up by 6 with potential to cover. And Davidson did drain a 3, and it kind of went back and forth. So kudos to Oklahoma State. Like you said, throughout the broadcast, they did talk about it quite a bit. And they don't mention the team rule that was broken. They don't mention whether or not Steve Lutz is going to play these guys the remainder of the way, but something to look out for sure.
My gut tells me if it was a team rule, they may be back next game. Usually, like, broke a team rule is typically 1 game from my experience. I mean, they would have to, I think suspended indefinitely would have been the wording if it wasn't like a 1 game thing. So that's something to keep an eye on, because of course Oklahoma State did advance and will play in the next round. And we'll see what we can get to today. But ultimately, I'm gonna probably start tomorrow's show with this same thing, because that way you can go back to the timestamp. Saturday, these teams are going to all play again over the course of this weekend, I believe. Either Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I think, is the next round of the NIT. And what's even more important, and what I'll hammer home here before we get into our Miami, Ohio SMU breakdown, is that the books are really going to lose track of these games once the NCAA tournament games are starting to go. And so when you see these NIT matchups pop up on a Saturday, and books are still trying to get lines out for the next round, because of course Thursday's games just ended, Friday's games are going on, you will get a soft line or two in the NIT. And so that's why I wanted to lead the show off because again, like, I don't know where I'll be looking to see where David Green was, but if that's one where it's like, okay, if he's hurt today and he's gone this weekend, like that. Tulsa was fortunate last night to win, took overtime at home to beat Stephen F. Austin. So yeah, and we'll do this tomorrow for the games tonight. I'll be interested to see, what, who isn't playing in the NIT games tonight. But first, Rob, we've got some business to take care of in the NCAA tournament, the first 4. And let's start with what a game this is going to be. I've been talking about it for days. I'm either going to look very smart or very dumb by the end of the night tonight. It's Miami of Ohio, SMU. The reason I say that is because we did a show and Wager Talk clipped me sort of basically saying Miami of Ohio is going to win 2 games in this tournament. I actually feel like if they get through SMU tonight, they have a great chance against Tennessee. But as far as this game goes, Rob, I love the Red Hawks. This is going to be my parlay leg. This is a client play for me. There's no sense in trying to come on here and act like I'm not like on Miami of Ohio already. I've said it on like 4 different shows. I said it on the radio this morning. So is my love for Miami of Ohio as a dog here warranted? And are you going to get involved with the total, because you've kind of nailed these Miami of Ohio totals all season?
Yeah, this is one of the totals that I liked coming out, Adam. I think we may have talked about this, maybe you and I, on Monday. Today is Wednesday. God, I lose track of days. I don't think it was Sunday. I think it was Monday, you and I. But again, this is one of those where it's hard to see defensive resistance on any side. We have so much proof, game results, data points, whatever you want to call them, of the lack of defense shown by both of these teams. Of course, we're SMU. Let's just start and begin with the BJ Edwards situation. He hasn't played in a few games, probably not playing here tonight either. So SMU has had a few games to get used to that. And SMU has also had a couple of games where they scored despite not having him. 78 against Florida State, 86 against Syracuse. Of course, in the final, or in the ACC tournament, the game they got booted from the tournament, they only scored 58 against Louisville. Those teams had seen each other twice already this year, so it's not hard to figure that there could have been some defensive adjustments and some really good defensive knowledge sets and whatnot. But here, boy, I don't know. Miami O, we talked a lot this year, Adam, as Miami O went through their undefeated season about how kind of watered down the MAC was this year. There weren't many good teams. Akron, even Miami of Ohio, as they kept winning and winning. They were winning close games, high scoring close games, mind you, against lesser teams in this league, 500, sub 500, you name it. So I don't think SMU is going to have any trouble whatsoever scoring, and they love pace. And while Miami's is, I think, can be described as controlled pace, they still do like first open shot taken. And they do get first open shot quite a bit and quite quickly, oftentimes. And they've got the guys, Elmer, Peter Suter, et cetera, that can drain these shots. So to me, it's an up and down game without a lot of defensive resistance. Neither side's going to back off. There's no, it's too late now for Andy Enfeld to try and do something different with the SMU defense. They are what they are. I think they both believe they can outscore the opponent tonight, to tell you the truth. I think Miami O believes they can win an 88-86 game. I think SMU believes the same thing. So to me, after seeing Dayton yesterday with UMBC and Howard and the amount of points that were put up there, we know right off the bat that the Dayton rims, and I think this was proven the last couple of years, really, they're not difficult rims. You score at this venue as long as you don't come in too wired and maybe a little bit too nervous. I don't think the lights bother either one of these teams. So for me, a little bit surprised it hasn't moved off 163, but perhaps those who do numbers and play these games off of analytics plus sharp groups, maybe they just thought this was in a good place from the get-go, because this is one of those numbers that the odds maker hasn't had to move or hasn't seen his opener budge whatsoever. But to me, over 163, right way to go here in this one.
So let's the point I made earlier in the week, I'm still very adamant that that's a good angle for Miami of Ohio, with the fact that, they, for 2 months, every single game, they had a target on their back. They were the favorite. They took every single team's best shot in MAC play. They were every team's biggest game of the year in MAC play. You haven't seen a crowd like that in Amherst for a UMass game in years, right? Like every single one. I was at the game in Athens, 10,000 people at the convo for that game, and they won every single one of those games. Yeah, they lose to UMass in the conference tournament, but now they have, they went from having all the pressure and all the expectations to being the team with no pressure. And they're almost like playing with house money because, of course, they're an underdog and they're in the tournament. Part of the pressure was, if they lose one, are they going to get in? Well, we know the answer to that. They're in. And Rob, they're also 50 minutes away from their campus. But to further this, let's go back to the injury discussion. What I'm hearing is BJ Edwards is nowhere near ready to play, or in playing shape. So BJ Edwards, it's his ankle. I fully expect SMU to milk this to the point where he's even out there for warmups. Think like Donnie Freeman, Syracuse, for the first month of the season, where they sent him out there to do warmups every game and then he didn't play. That's what I think this is with BJ Edwards, because I think they had to make it as realistic as possible that he would play to help there. Because if he was just ruled out, they might have given this last spot to Auburn, right? If they knew he was going to be out for the tournament. So I think SMU had to sort of play it up a little bit. I think if you see him tonight, it's in a very limited role off the bench. What I'm more concerned with here, Rob, is Corey Washington's now on the injury report, undisclosed. Okay, that's not good. Typically, you don't want to see that. Corey Washington, undisclosed injury, 11.3 points per game. You might be without 2 scorers in a game where you need to score, because Miami of Ohio should shred this SMU defense. Their bigs are not super fast. They don't defend the pick and roll particularly well. So, Miami's going to get theirs here, in my opinion. The question is SMU going to score up and over the number they need to cover this number? And I say no. So I took Miami, Ohio +7. I feel like I maybe should have gotten 7.5. That's on me. The 8.5 was out there really. So what happened from a betting standpoint was open 7.5. On Sunday, it got quickly faked up to 8.5 and then bet right back down to 7. It's been either 7.5, 7 or 6.5 ever since. So I think 7 is a fine number, Rob. I'm going to call it right here. They're going to win this game. Not even going to need the points.
It was a great draw too, Adam. I think I made this point on Sunday when we were on the selection show that every projection that we saw from bracketologists, and not that we pay a ton of attention to it, but I did because my youngest went to Missouri. Every projection I saw had Missouri playing in this game against Miami of Ohio. And in fact, they thought that in Missouri, in Columbia, Missouri, where I do a segment every Friday afternoon, and they asked me the question. It said, it looks like we're going to play Miami. Oh, what do you think? And I thought that was a great matchup for Missouri. Turns out Miami of Ohio gets SMU, which is a dream matchup for Miami of Ohio. It's so different than having to play Missouri. No physicality on the defensive end. Pretty much up and down style. No really set type of offense here. So for Miami, just from a side perspective, really good draw. And they do have opportunity to move on here. I think it'll be high scoring.
Yeah, and just for additional context, I mean, I made the number 5.4, and that was before having any idea that Washington might miss. So, like, no matter how you slice it, I think there's value on Miami of Ohio. Again, I didn't even get the best number in this scenario. I got clients have 7, and I'm fine with that. I'd prefer 7 or better. We will use 7 for the parlay, and that is one of my client plays tonight, Miami of Ohio +7. So first leg of the parlay locked in. We need to hit a couple of these, Rob. Maybe we'll go 3-teamer today. We'll see what the rest of the show brings. But what I'm going to do, so Garth, I see you there, and I'm going to just go to the other NCAA tournament game first because enough people are talking about it in the chat where I think we're going to get to it at some point anyway. So then we'll go to your question. It looks like Bayou is making a case for Prairie View in the comments. After last night, Rob, I think I might agree with that a little bit more than maybe I did prior to that game. So what I mean by that is last night UMBC, I don't even think UMBC needed to play a great game to win that game. They just played poorly, and still, even with playing poorly, they still came down the court, had a look from 3 to tie the game. It didn't go in, but the more I sort of think back to how that game played out, yes, it was poor play, but they also were very put off by the physicality of Howard. And even if you heard Jim Ferry, you want how about that in-game quote, Rob, where he was just like, he's doing an interview in the first half, and basically he's like, this isn't my team right here. He's like, we're slow. We have no energy. We're getting beat to the spot. We're getting beat to every 50-50 ball. And that was ultimately the story of the game. Like Howard just had better energy. They were more physical, and they were able to win the game that way. The SWAC team, so Howard comes from the MEAC, Prairie View from the SWAC. Typically, that's the MO of these SWAC teams. They're what they lack in maybe like basketball, coaching. Like they're not always you're never going to turn on a SWAC game and just see like like Miami of Ohio type spread offense or Ben McCollum type preparation. You're going to see like super physical and go straight to the rim. But it has worked in these playing games over the years. Like the SWAC teams have a very good record in the play-in round, and it's because they run up against a team like Lehigh who can't match them physical, can't match them on the glass. And in Lehigh's specific instance, if Prairie View can shut down Hank Alvey, they probably win this game. So I got to be honest, at this point, Lehigh -3.5, that's like way too inflated for me. I'd be looking to punch back with the dog. How do you see this one, Prairie View Lehigh, and can you apply that to the total at all since you're coming off a total win in the play-in last night?
Yeah, it's in this game, for those who saw Prairie View win their conference tournament final the other day, and in fact, go back to watching them beat Bethune-Cookman and Reggie Theus a couple days before, Adam, and they've done it throughout with defense. How about this is a team that's on an 11-0 ATS run? Prairie View 11-0 ATS last 11 games. Done it mostly with defense. But the point I want to make about both of these teams, and more so about Prairie View, when they won, when the clock hit 0 and they won that conference tournament final, it was an absolute mob scene. A lot of these teams that come from not the number one seed, but Prairie View, I think, came from a really low seed, 6 maybe. I don't have my SWAC tournament bracket in front of me, but I think they came from like the 6 to win that thing. And you'd have thought they won the national championship. And now you have to get back and get ready. I think that's what happened to UMBC a little bit last night. Still the elation of beating Vermont, of winning that tournament, come out flat, because these teams don't get the full 4 days to regroup, reset, game plan. They go right back at it a couple of days after being selected. So for Prairie View, I do wonder if they get right back on their feet. And the same, to me, goes to Lehigh, who as well is on a huge run. 7-2 ATS, 8-1 straight up. I didn't think they could win a couple of those games. I didn't, even at the end, I didn't know that they would beat Boston U, but they did. They won all the way through. They're the better shooting team. I think that there's a real dichotomy here between these two. Prairie View is going to defend like crazy from the tournament 2 games that I watched, and Lehigh is going to shoot the basketball. Very methodical. Prairie View is not really a solid up and down type team, but they are a defensive hounding type team. So to me, you could be looking at an under here, Adam. I don't know that the shooting of Prairie View, and this thing's been bet down. Now that I look, this number's down to 142.5, open 146. I agree with that total movement here. Prairie View is going to be up on Lehigh shooters. Prairie View, not good enough shooting the basketball, I don't think, to dent Lehigh all that much. And the pace, I think Lehigh can somewhat control it, because Prairie View kind of goes wherever the other side wants them to go. But I was impressed, especially by the win against Bethune-Cookman. And this 11-0, how do you get in front of an 11-0 point spread team last 11 games coming in? I think the only way you get in front of that is if you convince yourself that the conference tournament final was so big for them and they haven't had enough time to come back to earth yet to play this game. So we'll see. Lehigh can shoot it good enough. If they open up on a big run, maybe it wakes Prairie View up right away, but I could see Prairie View getting caught at the beginning. But that defense is really, really good, from what I saw. And they're relentless, Adam. There's like no lack of energy for Prairie View. So I could see under here in this case. Under 142.5 is out there. Yeah, more often than not, you can find 142.5. So I see some places even lower, but you shouldn't have any trouble getting a 142.5.
Yeah, I was pretty tuned into this Lehigh run through the conference tournament. Toward the end of the tournament, I went to the Patriot League final, Bethlehem, PA. And what I can note about that stretch is, like, I mean, Hank Alvey's playing out of his mind. He is, and in that conference, which I've talked about numerous times on this show this year, the Patriot League is very down from what it's been in years past. Like, I used the Noah Williamson example, him leaving to go to Alabama, right? Like for years, even at the beginning of NIL, the Patriot League, for the most part, you would have the grad transfer out of the Patriot League, but you didn't see guys really leaving the league. And so now, like, I think this is as not talented, for lack of a better term, as the Patriot League has been in a long time. They don't have a ton of size on any of these teams. They don't have great bigs on any of these teams. The last time Lehigh faced a big that could really sort of take Alvey out of the game was their most recent loss on February 18th against Navy, when they lost 72-49. Alvey had 8 points in 30 minutes. He couldn't do much in that game. So, like, that's kind of how I think Prairie View can throw some size and some toughness at Alvey. And if they can take him out of the game, I mean, Lehigh's going to have to go nuts from 3 to win this game, in my opinion. BU tried to do that a little bit in the finale, but the thing is, Lehigh did hit a lot of those shots, and Boston University just could not shoot the ball in that game. They were 1 for 16 in the Patriot League final from 3, Boston U. So, Lehigh, you're looking at Lehigh's most recent game, 74-60 win. But, Ben Defty, who's a 7-foot center for Boston University, he did an okay job on Alvey. I mean, BU just straight up could not buy a bucket in that game. So maybe a little bit deceiving in the final there because I thought, I thought they did an okay job on Alvy in that game. And I think Prairie View is set up to do an okay job on Alvy because they have the more physical, like they're going to push him around. They're more physical, they're more athletic. And if they can really bother him to the point where he's not able to take over the game, then I think you're going to see Prairie View win. So I would, I can't really put anyone off wanting to take the 3.5 there. I leaned Lehigh, Rob, earlier in the week when it was like -1.5. But now that that's got hit up 2 points, I think the only way I could go would be to go, sort of punch back against the market.
Yeah, and I think Steve Duke right there in the comment that you're flashing at him is, referring to what we were saying about Prairie View being on an 11-0 ATS run. I mean, I don't know how you go against that either. Very difficult to bet into those things. Like I say, you can justify, you can look for reasons, but it's guesswork. You're guessing about a team's emotional state heading in, and it's so hard to bet games that you're only guessing. Could be right, could be wrong. I always say 2020 hindsight. We don't have that going in. So, yeah, this just seems to me it's got a way different feel than Howard UMBC did last night. More free flowing, more offense oriented. This one, Prairie View, it's a squad that when you watch them, they'll run, but it's kind of like they run with no sense of where they're going. Like
Correct.
they'll score off of it, but they just don't have they just don't have a sense of where they're going, but they could score. So interesting game. I would lean a little bit under. Didn't play it, but I would lean that way.
Yeah, I could see it being a kind of a dogfight. Having
Where's
a hard time
Navy?
scoring.
We need Navy, not Lehigh. We need Navy.
Yeah, it is. It's unfortunate, but I'm sure we'll get to Navy in this show. Let's go to first I'm going to promo double the firepower CBB package 3-day. Myself and Rob. If you start it today, it's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Obviously, if you wait till tomorrow, you get Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Although tonight is, from a betting standpoint, just as good as Thursday and Friday, in my opinion. With all the NIT games, as I already said, played one last night, South Alabama, pretty easy winner. Kind of kicking myself for not getting to the window with a couple others, but again, there's just a lot of uncertainty when it comes to who's playing in these games, and like you were even saying yesterday, like I had heard that Roy might not play for Oklahoma State, but I certainly was unable to confirm it. And then they roll up without multiple guys playing. So that's what I'll be doing the rest of the day. For the rest of the show, let's start to get into some of these NIT games. So let's go to Garth here. First one he's going to bring up. He says he's looking at Kent State plus 5.5, and I'm gonna go to my odds logic screen here because if it is 5.5, which it is now, that's definitely taken some money since the opener. I believe this opened Illinois State -7. This game is in Normal, Illinois tonight, so a home game for the Redbirds, Rob. Kent State taking money tells me to look for a couple of things. One, Chase Walker has played through injury for a lot of the second half of the season for Illinois State. That's, he's one of the best bigs in that conference. So I'd want to know if he's playing. And then, again, he's been in and out of the lineup for Illinois State. So that coming down 1.5, that's where I'm going to start to look and see, Walker, he played, so he was out. He got hurt on February 12th against Valpo. Did not play again till the 25th. He did play and played pretty poorly in the conference tournament. So 1.5 point move to Kent State. That would be a big omission to not have him against for Illinois State to not have him against this Kent State front court. So talk to me a little bit. I have nothing to confirm that, but that's where I'm going to start to look. Do you agree with Garth that Kent State's got some value even at the 5.5?
Yeah, and where Walker's concerned, 13 trips to the free throw line in that conference tournament final shows that maybe he was involved in a little bit of physicality in that game. Maybe that's a good sign for his presence. Maybe it's not. We'll see. But they did run into the Northern Iowa buzzsaw. If I just start with conference comparison, Adam, the Missouri Valley is obviously had a much better year and better teams than what the MAC presented. MAC was top heavy. Kent probably the third best team in that league. Certainly Kent capable. And, Kent's one of those teams where I don't worry about them being on the road, honestly. Illinois State home floor advantage, not that bad. But again, you have to decipher let's get back out on the floor and win, and man, we're PO'd that we lost the conference championship game to Northern Iowa when we missed our shot at the big dance, March Madness. That's the category that Illinois State falls into. Kent State eliminated before the conference tournament final. So I would think that they're a little more rambunctious to get out on their floor. We saw last night, and I don't know the answer to this one either, but we did see last night that Tulsa, as good as they are, and at home, put nobody in the stands. That was a dark, empty building. It's interesting. I'll just give us a quick side story here. My son's band is about to go on tour, and their photographer, the band photographer, flew in a couple nights ago. He's from Tulsa. Knows a lot about the program, knows a little about OSU as well. But we looked at the screen last night of the game, and he's like, my God, it must be spring break in Tulsa. He said, when I left, I think it was spring break. And then you look at Gallagher-Iba, where there were people, and all these teams are not on the same time frame where spring break is concerned. So something to look into to see whose gym is going to be full, whose isn't. Illinois State in a half-empty gym wouldn't be good for them, I don't think.
It's a pretty big building there.
Yeah, and coming – you've been there. Go ahead and let them know you've been there.
Well, no, I was just going to comment. I'll let you finish, the breakdown. But you made a really good point. No one at Yale yesterday. No one at Tulsa. But then you did have a couple of good crowds. Auburn had a nice crowd. Oklahoma State. So that's definitely something to think about. Illinois State's pretty big arena. They actually lost in the quarterfinal round. So they were out on Friday in their conference champion tournament in a quarters to Northern Iowa, who Northern Iowa eventually won the conference tournament. So you're looking at 12 days since they last played, Rob. But yeah, like if they pull up to a arena that's not that full, I would be concerned. I'm trying to think, because Illinois State has been in this tournament a couple of times. I can remember good NIT crowds, but sometimes those good NIT crowds don't come until like round 2 or the quarterfinal. The quarterfinal games tend to get a decent turnout when you're one win away from, like, it used to be going to the Garden. Now it's going to Indy and going to Hinkle. So, it's something to definitely think about. You know how you can figure it out, though? Just go to the website and see how many tickets are for sale. If there's dots all over the seat map that haven't been purchased on game day, probably going to be a pretty light crowd. George Mason had an okay crowd last night, but that's another one. They always get fans. Like, there's some of these places, they always get a turnout. But if you're not one of those places, I was surprised that no one was at Yale last night. That was the biggest shocker to me. I wonder if that program was just so, like, thought they probably all came up to Ithaca this weekend, went to the Ivy Madness, didn't make the NCAA tournament. I wonder if they were just like, yeah, we're just not interested. Because that was the shocker for me, that they had no one in the stands there for that game. But go back to your point about Illinois State, and let's say you don't get a super motivated Illinois State. Kent State could absolutely come in here and win this game.
Well, and I think they just, I think they have more scoring ability, Adam. If we're going to let's just get into fundamentals for a minute here. The style matchup without. Because in these games, these first round games, you have to drag in so many situationals, so many exterior factors. But if we just get down to how these teams match up, who should be able to do what against one another, Kent State is not an overly big team where height is concerned, but Gillespie and Rob Whaley are a nice duo, and a high scoring duo. Where their height is concerned and where their size is concerned. And I just don't – Illinois State, to me, in watching this league all season long, there were good scoring teams, and then there was, a level below scoring teams. And I put Illinois State there. They weren't in the class of Belmont. They weren't in the class of Murray State. They weren't in the class, really, of Bradley. Even Northern Iowa at the end, as slow as they go, you can depend on them for offensive efficiency. Illinois State, I think, banks a little bit more than Kent would on the defensive side. So to me, the question becomes, do I believe Kent can score on the Illinois State defense? My answer to that is yes. I think Kent has proven it. Again, you can say that Kent did it against kind of lesser defensive opposition inside the MAC, but they did it excessively. And I would say this, I would say that Illinois State actually didn't have a ton of defensive competition in their league either. That was somewhat more of a balanced league rather than defensive oriented league. So to me, I would take 5.5 here. You tell you the truth, Adam, my better look here from a totals perspective would be on the Kent team total. This total has been bet up a little bit, but Kent's only asked in this case to get to 74 points. And they do that on a regular basis, no matter who they play. Kent can get to 74 almost just by showing up. So if they show up in front of a flat crowd in an empty building where they're motivated, I think Kent team total probably would be my best look here.
So a couple final thoughts before we move on to a different game. Like, again, I'm just going off of the fact that, like, Walker was a little bit banged up all that last month, but, like, he is the best rebounder on Illinois State, and Kent State is a very good rebounding team. Like, you could get a handful of second chance points here for Kent State, especially if Illinois State doesn't have Walker here for some reason. But as it pertains to just the over in general, when Illinois State has played without Chase Walker, they really are like a different team, since he's such like an offensive hub for them. If they don't have him, I feel like it's a little bit faster of a game. Probably, you're probably gonna, another reason Illinois State was disappointing this year, Rob, Johnny Kinzinger just is not the same player that he was last year. He took a big step back. Started to shoot the ball better toward the end of the year, but still, like, this guy was a 39% free throw shooter for the first 2 years of his career, 30% from behind the arc this year. And so I think that's part of the reason why Illinois State has not sort of ever realized their potential. It's probably why they've burnt money most of the year, because from memory, I don't think they've been very good against the number. They were consistently power rated, one of the top teams in this league, and just never, ever achieved that. And I think it's still, at least with the opening number of 7, like the books are still very, they're really pricing Illinois State as like a top option. And even at full strength, I don't know if they've been that, because Kinzinger is shooting 10% lower from behind the arc than he was last year. And he's one of the sort of main offensive threats. So, Garth, I don't dislike the call of Kent State there. So here, as we're speaking, you're getting some Illinois State buyback, which, again, that doesn't really surprise me either. This is one I'll have my eye on, though. I want to see if Kent State's going to play everyone, because remember, we just saw Kent State over the weekend in the MAC tournament. Got to make sure that there's no one that's not going to play. But Rob, I'll go one final point and I'll let you close this one down. Illinois State is one of those teams. They fit the mold of, like, we haven't played in a really long time. They got knocked out in the quarterfinal round of the first weekend, which means this will be 12 days since they've played. And that, I don't think that that's necessarily a good thing. I don't love that for a team that maybe had to basically reconvene to play in this tournament. That's not the profile I typically like.
Yeah, and I think we did hit on that particular aspect of the handicap yesterday, Adam. Some of these teams you're going to find played their conference tournaments 2 weeks ago, opening week of conference tournament action, not the past weekend, which the MAC does hold back, and they play the week of the big boys. So Kent is the fresher team. They've been on the floor more recently, which I always think is an advantage. I don't like the excessive layoff. However, to your point about Walker, 12 days off could help. Could certainly help in injury type situations. So you have to kind of go through it all situationally. But as a standard rule of thumb, I don't like teams that have been off for, let's say, any more than 6 days is a long, long time for a college basketball team that's used to such a regimented season where you're used to playing every at least third or fourth day.
Just gives me flashbacks to last year when they were literally pulling the Samford kids off the beach. And we're like, yo, you guys got a game on Tuesday. That's a true story. They were all on spring break. They had to like round them up. Hey, we got to go play George Mason on Tuesday. And predictably, they got destroyed. That was from last year's NIT. So stuff like that, very important. We can do an NCAA tournament game. I'm not going to deny the request for an NCAA tournament game. If Frank, appreciate the donation. And then we'll go to Mad Max, who's got a donation as well in one of the NIT games. And then Rob will let you lock in a parlay lake. So let's start here. He says, Adam, Rob, and Steve Merrill. Shout out, Steve. That was a fun show on Sunday night doing the live bracket reveal. He says, thank you for your ongoing advice. It was a great day for me yesterday. Any hints with TCU and Ohio State? And Rob, I'm just going to say what I've said on a couple of shows previous. I love the TCU backcourt. I've said this all year. I think that they are very underrated defensively when it comes to their on-ball pressure. If you can get through that, you can probably beat TCU a little bit at the rim. But TCU's done a really good job defending the likes of like a Florida. There's numerous sort of instances in Big 12 play where their guards really disrupted a better team. And now you look at Ohio State, and if you can sort of disrupt Bruce Thornton, you've got a really good chance to beat Ohio State. So I like the TCU Horned Frogs. I have not bet this yet, but it's on my radar. So I'm going to leave it at that. I don't really have much else to add. Talk to Frank about TCU Ohio State, Rob.
Yeah, good game. The line is indicative of where the overall personnel on these two teams is concerned. Disappointed somewhat, Adam, on the Ohio State side, although the play got a little bit better as the season went on of the 7-footer Christopher Tilley, who transferred over from the WCC to Ohio State this year. I thought he'd be more impactful than he was overall this season. A little bit better as the season went on. But what's more than a little bit better as the season went on is the performance of TCU. 9-2 straight up down the stretch in a very, very difficult conference, and the ability to play multiple ways. TCU will beat you 67-65, and then TCU can win 92-88. It just doesn't matter. They can score. I think an underrated player in this game, and he missed a couple of games, or at least a little bit of time was played through injury, was David Punch for TCU. We talk about the guards a ton because of their defensive tenacity. I know you first brought that up a long time ago, start of the season, and that's key in this matchup. When you go up against Thornton, when you go up against John Mobley, Devin Royals played really well for Ohio State, who's gotten better down the stretch too. I think they're 4-1 to close the year. But Ohio State is guard-driven, definitely guard-driven from an offensive perspective, where I think Jamie Dixon's team is one that's far more capable of dispersing points, which I like in these tournaments, where you can have 4 guys in double figures, let's say between 11 and 18 or 12 and 21, something like that. More options, more people to defend. Here, you're absolutely right. You go get Thornton, and Mobley and Royal have been nice complementary players, but I don't know that without Bruce Thornton putting up 20 plus that Ohio State can win a game inside a tournament like this. So I had a little bit of success, Adam, throughout the season playing Ohio State overs because I would fade their defense a little bit in Big Ten play. It worked to an extent. I have a hard time seeing which way this game is going to go. Last night we watched Texas and NC State play a 66-64 game, or wherever that was, 68-66, very low scoring. I could see that happening here in terms of being in the mid 130s, but I could also see this being in the low 150s, 77-74, because both teams, especially TCU, is capable of going both ways. I think that Ohio State is more apt to want to play the game higher scoring. The question is going to be, and Thornton's been around so long, I really don't know why I should question his ability to handle pressure, because he's just been at Ohio State for so long and done it at such a high level. Adam, I have a bias to want to play TCU. I don't have a real good feel on this total. I have to tell you, I think this game could be played one of two ways, probably a better in-game bet than a pre-flop, so to speak, bet.
I think if this game was played maybe 5 weeks ago, month ago, 5 weeks ago, it would have been a very easy bet on TCU for me. But like you said, like Ohio State, Thornton has had some complimentary help over the last month. Like Ohio State's kind of quietly been very, very good. They played their way from like maybe not making the tournament all the way to an 8 seed, right? Like they've had a really impressive sort of close to the season. So it would only be TCU for me, TCU or pass. But I think I maybe need to give Ohio State a little bit more respect than I'm giving them. That's what's putting me off here. That's why I haven't bet this yet. I'm wondering if I'm maybe underestimating Ohio State because I'm looking at the whole body of work and not putting enough stock into how good they've been down the stretch, because I think that would sort of even it out a little bit. And again, if Thornton's got help, putting the ball in the basket, Ohio State probably wins. So it's all about TCU and their guards and their ability to pressure Ohio State on the perimeter. But if they can't do that, Ohio State might be in business. So it's going to be an interesting game. Not one I have bet yet, but I do have a lean toward TCU. Rob, do you know what game you want to go to for the parlay, or do you want to do the requested game first and then go to your leg? It's up to you. Well, requested game is going to be Dayton Bradley.
Yeah, well, that won't be my parlay leg, so let me just go ahead and give the parlay leg now, which 2 opportunities, same game. I think I'm going to include the dog here because I like the dog. I won't exclude them, but I'm going to play Sam Houston, New Mexico, over the number of 164.5. Sam Houston, I talked a lot about down the stretch. And in their conference tournament, actually had a ticket on them to win that CUSA tournament, and they just quite couldn't get past Kennesaw State and exited, I think, in the semifinal round. But Sam Houston State, I've said it once, I've said it twice. They've got multiple guys that can get you buckets when necessary. It's just an all-out assault on offense from this team. There is no resistance defensively, which brings in the mindset of why don't you just play New Mexico in the pit, their team total over 88.5. It seems like a team that can get to 89 against Sam Houston State. And I wouldn't talk anybody off of that. The only reason why I'm going full game here is I don't want to discount Sam Houston's ability to play offense. The job Eric Olin did here 1 year, first year at New Mexico, with really a conglomeration of talent that had to be put together on the fly. Very, very good. The one problem you might have with New Mexico, Adam, is I feel like they thought they could win the Mountain West this year. Yeah. And they didn't. Is this the consolation prize to them? I don't think it's a consolation prize to Sam Houston State. Very close geographically here. I think Sam Houston State will take this as more of a test. Can we beat these guys in this venue? So I think you get full effort out of them. But again, the pit is just a place that even if your team comes in somewhat flat, the electricity of that place probably gets you going. I happen to think New Mexico is going to come to play anyway. You talked about this yesterday. I'll say it one more time, and maybe we'll say it again throughout the next couple of days, is that with this tournament now being played on the same weekend as the NCAA championship, it's a chance for two of these teams. I guess the first one is in Hinkle, the semifinals in Hinkle, but the championship in Cambridge. There's a chance if you get to the championship here to get a ton of eyeballs on you. And I think teams looking for somewhat of respect want to get there. I think New Mexico is one of those teams. And again, Olin, first-year head coach, I really think trying to lay something down here as a foundation for this team. So I could see New Mexico playing hard. This game's going to get over, in my mind, over 164.5. Yesterday, we had a lot of NIT unders. Generally, that's not the case. Today, we may have the overs come back. So give me Sam Houston, New Mexico State, full game total over 164.5, because I want to include Sam Houston's offense.
I'm not going to dispute any of that, and I'm going to move along because we've got 2 games that were requested. We got about 10 minutes to go, so we'll try to hit both of these. We've got 2 legs of the parlay locked in. Who knows? Maybe if Rob and I agree on one of these final 2 games, will make it a 3-teamer. Saw someone in the chat, Dayton, even though they're the higher seed, is not the home team tonight. Of course, the UD Arena being used for NCAA tournament games. So Dayton, despite being the higher seed, is on the road at Bradley tonight. And the Mad Max says he's 5-1 last 6. Props to Mad Max. That's great. Love to hear it. He said Bradley forces turnovers. Dayton turns it over 17.5% of their possessions. Yeah, they've definitely been turnover prone this year. It's part of the reason why Dayton was not a real contender in that league, despite getting to their conference championship game. Bradley's a great 3-point shooting team. But here's the thing with Bradley. This was the team last year that had a couple of guys opt out of this tournament. Then they felt guilty and they played. And then the one dude who was opting out because he wanted to get ready to go play pro somewhere got hurt. And so you have to want, and this is the same thing as George Mason, Rob, that yesterday where they kind of they won a few games, right? I think Bradley made it to the Elite 8 of this tournament last year, ended up losing, I want to say, to Chattanooga in the Elite 8 of this tournament last year. Coming into this season, I think they had aspirations for the NCAA tournament, and now they're back in the NIT. So Dayton always seems to take the NIT serious for the most part. Like if I'm going like Dayton was in it last year. Now they lost in similar fashion. I think they ended up having to go on the road and lost in like the second round last year. But I kind of think Anthony Grant's going to play everyone. So this one's tricky, but I lean if Dayton shows up with their full complement of players, I think they win this game. But that's what I'll be trying to figure out throughout the course of the day. Do you have anything here for Mad Max, Rob? Dayton and Bradley.
The only thing I worry about is Dayton disappointment. They played so well down the stretch, Adam. Like two different teams, honestly. But they've now played 10 consecutive games where their opponent hasn't touched 70. And it's more like an Anthony Grant team. Defense, defense, defense. 10 consecutive games holding teams to under 70. And Bradley's not necessarily a prolific offense. They've had games that have gone over the total, games that were played high scoring against high scoring teams in their conference, Belmont, Murray State, etc. But man, if Dayton comes to play here, if they're not thoroughly disappointed off of losing that championship game a couple days ago to VCU, then I would be playing Bradley team total under. This thing is 70.5, and nobody's hit that number in 10 straight games against Dayton. So they've obviously slowed themselves down a little bit more toward Dayton tendencies, or at least Dayton perception over the last decade, or at least as long as Anthony Grant has been there. And Bradley's not necessarily going to crank up the pace. So I don't know. My lean here would be definitely Bradley team total under 70.5, home or not home. Dayton's been terrific on defense. And if they clamp down, they can certainly squash this team and keep them under 70.5.
Bradley is another one of these teams that hasn't played since the first weekend of conference tournament play. Their last game was also against Northern Iowa on the 7th. So Northern Iowa took out Illinois State on Friday. They took out Bradley on Saturday. And so you're looking at an 11-day layoff, a team that kind of needed their fan base to get on them a little bit to take this tournament seriously last year. And I just have to wonder if they didn't want to take it seriously last year, got sort of like guilted into it by their fans calling them out for basically opting out. I don't know. I wonder how badly Bradley wants this one this year. But yeah, you make a really good point. Dayton, whether Dayton was they weren't an at-large, but like by Sunday, they had to feel like they could get to the NCAA tournament. They were a 3-point underdog to VCU in the final. So that's an interesting one too.
That the A-10 might take 3. If they won, the A-10 probably would have gotten 3. VCU would have made it. St. Louis was going to make it. So yeah.
It's a really interesting game. And of course, that's one where you got to make sure if you're looking at the bracket, it's going to look like Dayton is home. They are not. They are on the road in Peoria, Illinois tonight for that game. So, all right, let's finish off the show. Manzi is back in the chat. Manzi says, greetings, fellas. Thoughts on Colorado State, St. Joe's? He likes Colorado State with the elevation, and St. Joe's top guards tend to play 30-plus minutes. So He's looking at Colorado State tonight, Rob, in Fort Collins, Moby Arena. This is the Degenerate Special, 11 p.m. Eastern tip. How are you seeing this one? St. Joe's, Colorado State, out in Fort Collins tonight.
St. Joe's, I think, exceeded expectations, Adam. Remember back in the beginning of the year where they were kind of like a personnel mess, and somehow it became addition by subtraction with St. Joe's. At the one point where they were having personnel issues, it didn't look like St. Joe's was going to have a really good season. But it turned out to be a very good season. And the question with St. Joe's, I think, becomes, are they a product of their conference? Or did they really get better under Steve Donahue, who's a pretty good head coach? But they played well. I'm just counting off here 7-1 straight up down the stretch. The opposition, again, not great, but there was a win against George Mason in there, a pair of wins against Davidson. We saw Davidson last night play pretty well in Stillwater. But I would really tend to side with Colorado State here. Far more difficult conference. I won't do the pronunciation because I know the pronunciation here. You have this one down, Ali Farouk Manesh, or however you say it. I know you
Northern Iowa legend, Rob. Ali Farouk
Yeah.
Manesh. March legend. Ask Kansas about him.
Yeah, no, he hit a big shot. I just could never get his name right. But I feel like he brought Colorado State along real well, too, getting back to seriousness here. And Colorado State, I think, can find holes in the St. Joe's defense in this game. He definitely has Colorado State going slowest. That could bother St. Joe's. I tend to believe that St. Joe's, from what we saw down the stretch when they got better, would like to tune it up a little bit. But I think altitude was brought up in the comment right there. Altitude could be an issue for St. Joe's. You come from Philly, you go up there, you don't really know what it's like. I don't know that St. Joe's plays a ton of non-conference up in the high altitude of Colorado. So for me, I think it would be Colorado State. Credit to St. Joe's and what they did, Adam, and I would love to say take points here, but I think it's a tough situation, tough venue, and I think Colorado State just comes from better stock where conference is concerned.
Listen, again, it's all about, confirming lineups and stuff like that. If Colorado State takes this tournament seriously, I think they could be around for a while, especially if they draw a couple home games. That's a building I've been to before, Moby Arena. I've also been one time when it wasn't sold out, and even when that place is half full, it's still a very good atmosphere. The way it's built is there's one side that goes way up. So if they only have 4,000, it still feels very full because the last couple thousand seats, it's very weird. It's they're all on one side and they shoot up the one side. So that's a place where 4,000 or 5,000, it may only have half attendance, but it's still going to feel like a solid atmosphere. Obviously, something that doesn't matter how many people show up. Altitude is still altitude, and St. Joe's doesn't make this trip very often. Out to the Rocky Mountains. Ali Farouk Manesh, you mentioned, first-year head coach, but a lot of people, when Nico Medved took the Minnesota job, were Colorado State's going to be fine because Farouk Manesh was the mastermind behind a lot of what they were doing offensively. And Colorado State's still been pretty solid offensively. Aside from that stretch where they had some injuries and they just straight up could not buy a shot, there was a 5 or 6 game stretch in Mountain West play where they couldn't make anything. But you go back to earlier in the year, and they were as efficient of an offensive team as you could find through the first couple months of the season. So, yeah, the opener was 5.5. It's got bet up. If it goes back to 5.5, I think there might be enough value to take a stab with Colorado State there. This feels like a game that they probably find a way to win. All right, Rob. Let's you know what? We got all March. We still have plenty of time to make a run with the parlays. So let's keep it 2-teamer today. Since we went 0-2 yesterday, we got to walk before we can run here. Maybe we'll run it back with an NCAA tournament 3-teamer tomorrow. Today's parlay, 2-team parlay. For me, Miami, Ohio +7. That's a client play for me. I love them tonight. I think they're going to win the game. This is one time where I'm usually just take the 7 points. I think you could actually sprinkle a little bit on the money line there. I really like the Red Hawks. And then Rob Vino's going with Sam Houston State, New Mexico, out in the pit in Albuquerque, one of my favorite buildings I've ever been to, Rob. That place is awesome. Over 164.5. So that's your two-teamer today. Miami, Ohio, +7. Sam Houston, New Mexico, over 164.5. Check out our package, double the CBB firepower, 3 days. And if you email in, you can do the rest of the season. Rob and I will be back to talk more games in the morning. Have a great day, everybody.